Let me give you a little bit context. I always say that it takes a village to build something, right? So when we did our latest journey was Gojek, when we did something, Sidu was a very important pillar. But before that, let's go back 16 years. So Sidu started the startup called Active Mops, which was Twitter, but with SMS. And they created communities in Bangalore. They ran it for 2, 3 years, and they got a lot of traction. It was pretty good. But Sidhu has this fortunate thing or unfortunate thing. He's always ahead of time. So that did not pan out. Then Sidhu worked with ThoughtWorks with me. We were there for 4 years, but there was always urge to surge. And Sidhu actually again went out and created a company called C42, which was a consulting company which ended up creating a edtech platform as well for learning Ruby and other technology platforms. Then they said, enough of consulting, let's do product. So as we say, no, we should dog food ourselves. So they started a matrimony product and got there, one of the co-founder married, which is good because they're trying to figure out the product and co-founder found somebody on their own product and they got married, which is perfectly fine. The engine is still there. And then we got into working with Sequoia around early 2015. And late 2015, our both companies got acquired by Gojek through Sequoia. And then Gojek went on a crazy path. We grew around 5 to 10% week on week. That means that if you are doing 10,000 orders in May 2015, you are doing 500,000 orders in December 2015. You are doing $1.5 million in December 2016, and you are doing 4.5 million orders in December 2019. So we grew that with payments growing to 7.5 million orders. And while all that stuff was going on, and a lot of people see me as like trying to do that thing, Sidhu played a very important role in building our org and scaling our recruitment and making sure many more things. So Sidhu headed HR, recruitment. He was dealing with India he was MD of India, and also did data engineering. So he did many, many things in those 5 years. That's the kind of summary of what you have been doing. So you want to talk those days where he has been 3 or 4 times and done things which are around org, hustle, recruitment, the problems you are already facing or you all will face in, say, next 2, 3, 4 quarters if you guys find PMF and all the stuff. Actually, in early days of PMF, right, Sidhu, we did a lot of stuff. How do you think we should think about product development in early days?
So, this is a very interesting thing because over time, and I've gone through this cycle a few times, right? It took me a while to realize that pre-PMF, you aren't really building a product. It's dangerous to think of a lot of what we do is actually predicated on how we think about it. Because nothing that we do is physical. If you're building a car or something, right, it's very easy to see what you're doing, see, oh, I built this part, I built this part. When you're building a company, and especially something that depends heavily on software, most of what you do, you can't see. And it's very important to realize that how you imagine it and how you think about it, the mental models you use dramatically change how you execute. And in this particular instance, the shift was when I realized that pre-PMF, what am I really building? I can't possibly be building a product because I don't know the product. I can't possibly be building something that I don't understand. So over time, what happened is my mental model shifted to thinking about it as what I am building is an experimentation and search engine. There's a solution space in front of me within which there is PMF. And I have a certain budget, I have a certain amount of time, and I have access to certain other resources, but fundamentally it's time and money really, right? What I'm building is a machine that can search the solution space most efficiently to find PMF. Now, once I find PMF, then I pivot to actually building the product. They're not the same thing at all. So if you think about your, let's talk about this through, for example, metrics. It's very easy to anchor on the metrics of your domain and your thesis. If you're building ed tech, whatever, you will start thinking about, student minutes on the platform, etc. pre-PMF. But the reality is those are all second order. Your core metrics are, how much does it cost me to run an experiment? How long does each experiment take? Like, I literally need to have a project management dashboard that says experiments. Those are my units. Cost per experiment, time per experiment. And then probably most importantly, does each completed experiment emit information which allows me to make a decision? If an experiment runs and I don't make a decision after that, it's easy to think about it as, did the experiment succeed or fail? You want the experiment to succeed, but that's still the wrong mental model. You want the experiment to emit information which allows you to make a concrete decision. So the third metric is, did I make a concrete decision after this experiment? Yes, no. It's a completely sort of different way that I started looking at it. And, you know, that really changed how I executed day to day. Literally, what I do at the start of the day, what are my metrics, how do I track progress, week to week, month to month, everything changed.
Tell us about one of the things which we did at Gojek in terms of experiments, and we went through this thing which says we are not feature factory, right? And we should not treat. So one of the things which you realize, a lot of time product engineering is treated as feature factory. You build feature and feature. We just kept expecting that from product engineering teams. And Sidu says, why not build feature? And actually, and I want to ask you, why not build features? What is that which actually keeps you away from treating the product engineering as a feature factory?
So this is my favorite rant, right? Most conversations with founders or peers in the ecosystem involve a conversation about features they want to build. And fundamentally, there's nothing wrong with it. But I like to take an extreme stance on it, which is, please do not build features, right? Because this falls into the same class of problem. And it's interesting, like, what is a feature? I have this exercise that I like to run through with a lot of words that we use very casually, where I'm like, can you sit down and write a one-pager that explains the definition of this word? And then will that definition match to a reasonable degree with most other people? And there are an amazing set of there's an amazing percentage of the vocabulary that we use that fails this test. Product, by the way, is one of them. What is a product? Sit down, write a one-pager, get someone else to write a one-pager, it will not match. Feature is an extremely common example of this as well, right? So what ends up happening is, the moment you start thinking of yourself as building features, it affects everything about your operational flow. It dramatically changes how you execute. And this is weird, because if you can't define what a feature is, how is this something that shapes your execution, right? So the way I like to sort of reify this and phrase it is to say that, look, a feature is not a unit of execution. A feature is a unit of distribution. A feature is something that we package and sell to our customers. A customer buys a feature. We don't build a feature, right? You can't build a feature. What you can do is to deliver certain value props, which usually, though not always, can be quantified into metrics, right? We can say that, look, metric X is here, we want to move it to plus so much, so many percent, and we're going to run these following experiments, which will attempt to move the number. The experiment that succeeds, awesome, we stick with it, we discard the rest, right? And then when you have a basket of value props, which have palpably improved for the customer, you pick those, package them into units and sell them, and those packaged units are called features. Because I believe the customer perceives and will be more amenable to paying for metric A, metric B, and metric Z packaged together into a unit. But the moment you start thinking of yourself as, I'm building a feature, what actually happens is, think about it. Think about what happens in your mind when you say, I want to build a feature, right? You imagine a customer, picking up their phone, opening your app. I'm assuming you have an app, but whatever the interaction is. And then you imagine them going click, 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 click. Wow, value prop, customer thrilled, pays you money. This is what we imagine. We imagine the customer interacting with the product. Now, what's happened is, you are excited now because you're vested. You're excited and now biased in the interaction. You are now already committed to making that interaction work. And unfortunately, a workflow on an app is not an experiment, nor is it a unit of execution. What your target is that value prop at the end. So the moment you start thinking about it in terms of, oh, customer will do this, get excited, blah, blah, you've already biased yourself. You've crippled your ability to design and run N experiments attempting to deliver that value prop. Maybe there is no workflow needed at all, right? Maybe there is a manual process. Maybe there is something else which is a side effect somewhere else which can deliver that value prop. Maybe there's a cheaper way to do it. Maybe there's a better way to do it. You've automatically biased yourself. So the moment you think features, what you're actually doing is you're running a fantasy in your mind of a customer interacting with your product in a very specific way. Rather than staying focused on, I want to deliver value prop X to the customer, what are the 10 different experiments I need to run to get that value prop in their hands? So the reason I argue against features is not because there's anything fundamentally wrong with it, but because the degree of bias it creates is ridiculous. So instead of focusing on delivering the value prop, you start anchoring on proving the success of the workflow. You will see this repeatedly if you start digging into like the project plan, right? Your project plan starts skewing towards running experiments to prove that workflow will succeed, right? And the worst sort of slippery slope outcome of this is what Ajay just described as a feature factory, right? Where we used to start the year with a whiteboard with, blocks of stickies. Here are the 200 features we will build this year. Because the assumptions have already gone in that if these features are built, these value props will get delivered.
So, let's flip this other way, other way around, saying if you do not want to build feature factory, a lot of product engineering people actually face this. Yesterday we were talking, Chandra and I said one quote which says, you'll always be on fire if you found the PMF, and product engineering will always be slow. You'll always feel that your engineers are always slow; they don't deliver a lot. How do you want to advise on that? That how should CTOs and CPOs, head of product, head of engineering, should look at this? What way they should interact with their founders, or what way founders should interact with the product engineering people? Like we have dealt with a lot in Gojek. What did you do over there?
Look, this is a difficult one in many ways.
And the reason the reason I'm asking you is that time is essence over here in early days. And we shouldn't be spending a lot of time in debating. Also, we shouldn't be spending a lot of time debating on what we should build. We should build appropriate things. So that's why I'm asking.
Yeah.
It is context.
So this is a difficult one for me to generalize. I want to caveat this up front, right? Because a lot of it is down to the chemistry of the decision makers. It's not a rational thing. I mean, I will give you post-fact, like after this point, I will give you a rational framework that I believe in. But the truth is, yeah, that's going to be something that you use to support you to a degree. But the reality is that the core of this is the chemistry between those two people, right? Typically, your CEO and your CPTO. I'm not really a fan of splitting CTO and CPO at all, right? Doesn't make sense to me. But those two personas, the chemistry between them is of paramount importance. I've seen an entire spectrum work, right? Like one dominant, one always this thing, both peer. It just is a snowflake. So having caveated that, it's very important to understand that your execution in this game very quickly becomes a black box. Okay? Now, running an analogy from manufacturing, which is a dangerous analogy, again, caveat up front, in, let's say, car manufacturing, right? Your R&D is a distinct upfront step. You design the product, iterate on it, whatever, and then once it is done, design, then you go to production, and then you scale up production, right? So I want to caveat that for us, those two phases are combined perpetually. R&D and productionizing it are essentially the same thing for us. Now, having made that caveat, when you look at a car manufacturing system, right? If you say you want to improve the car, some attribute of it, you don't work on the car. That's meaningless. You work on the production system. You're like, which assembly line requires what different tools and machinery? Where do I need more manpower? Where do I have inventory piling up? Are there bottlenecks? Do I have quality control issues? Those quality control issues are not, you don't quality check the car at the end, right? Or you do, but that's not all you do. You're root causing it down to the individual components which are failing. And then you're attacking quality control at a component level on the assembly line. This mental model, it's a fairly straightforward like manufacturing thing, right? Yet for us, what actually happens is, in the early days, it's like 2, 3, 4, 5 of us hanging out together, building stuff. Everyone can see everything, all cool, everyone knows. Scale up a little bit, boom, the factory is a black box. All you see is the defects in the car. Your end product in the hands of the customer failing. You have no idea where those defects originate. You just make assumptions. If I ask you to scale up manufacturing, literally, the only thing you will be able to call out for sure is, I need more manpower. You cannot tell me which assembly lines are blocking. You can't tell me, where you have inventory. Like literally all the standard scaling levels in manufacturing, which do apply to us, are invisible. It's a black box. So this is why chemistry matters, by the way. Because instrumenting our factories is very hard because they are not physical. Right? It's an observability problem. And consequently, what ends up happening then is it is down to the subjective opinion of those two leaders as to what the problem is and how to solve it. And without instrumentation, just statistically speaking, you're going to be wrong most of the time. And inevitably, you're going to come down to one of two answers. We need more money, we need more people.
So let's talk about people. In early days, in your C42 also, you hired a lot of people. Then in Gojek was tough for us because we didn't operate in India. And we had to hire substantial amount of people in India because scope was too much, not because we wanted to go over quantity or quality. So tell us, what did you do? You did a lot of stuff. Tell us about the recruitment journey, because that was something pretty interesting. Like today, I can tell you, people still call us and tell us that Gojek is a very strong engineering brand in India. So what did you do? Tell us that journey.
So, I'm going to sort of adjust this to be relevant to you folks, right? Because a lot of that thing was starting to run machinery at scale, where you need to consistently roll out at the 99th percentile 20 offers a month, right? And while that is not like service industry scale hiring, at a, sort of a product industry scale, that's non-trivial, right? Like you're onboarding in excess of 100 people. And for us in India, there was no operations at all, right? You're just pure hiring tech. So I don't think that's super relevant because that is a lot of operations research, honestly, right? It's just like straight up numbers on pipelines and optimizations. In the early days, what really mattered, and I think this is true for all of you as well, is it's very crucial to look at candidates and understand their motivations. And the most important thing to understand is they are never going to join your company and they're never going to join your vision. They're going to join you. It isn't the vision that moves them. It is your articulation of that vision. Literally anybody else articulating that vision will not change their mind. You are the number one selling point. And I don't mean this in a Shah Rukh Khan movie star sense of you are the selling point where you're a brand ambassador. I mean, specifically, it is the opportunity to work alongside you, to get your time and attention over the next year or two as they work in your company. That is the number one value prop for most candidates. Now you have to design your hiring strategy and your hiring ops around this. It's easy to say, but as you start ramping up, you have to be able to structure your hiring funnels, like surfacing the information, so that you can take coffee conversations with candidates who cross a certain threshold. And I do not mean cross a certain threshold in your funnel. I mean who cross a certain threshold of, hey, high quality candidate. Because you may have zero hope of affording that candidate until your next round, right? You may not have an open position that's relevant for that person. That person may be too skilled for what you have, or they may have adjacencies, right? You may be looking for a VP Eng where most of your focus is on the back end. You may meet someone who's kick-ass on the front end. Too many founders I see are like, oh, not relevant for me today. It's so, so important to build that network. The metric you want to track your own performance is referrals. How many candidates have I spoken to who are referring in more candidates to me? This is the metric you live and die on, right? So you need, it's an operations problem. You're going to find yourself having to do like 2 coffee conversations a day on top of everything else you're doing. Because if you don't make that investment, you have to understand it's network, right? It's compounding. If you don't make that investment now, it will never compound. So you got to do those things and track your numbers, saying how many referrals am I getting in from people who we didn't hire? Because obviously, like in a larger company, referrals are all internal, right? It's like employees referring people. But the same dynamic applies here. You go out, you sell. What you're selling, remember, is not the company, not the vision. You are selling working with you in that company with that vision. Right? And you are selling this to everyone who crosses a threshold, whether you can afford them, whether you intend to hire them or not. And you track your performance on that by saying, boss, how much inbound am I getting of this? And the reason I'm saying this over and over again is so many people just back away from this because on top of everything else you've got to do, you've got to go. It's literally like you're bucketing like 2 hours of sales at least 3 days a week. But if you don't do it now, it will not compound. And by the time it comes to the place where you actually need to continuously hire a couple of people a month, your funnel won't be there. So this, I think, is sort of the approach that I would extract. Like we did this, but we did this with, key technologists. And when we got the chance to pull people over from Indo, when they were visiting, we would do it with them as well. But we basically built a recruiting strategy around the idea that here is someone you would love to work with. You should join because you get to work with this person. The typical approach that we see from large company hiring is the company brand makes the hiring manager. Right? You go join an Apple or a Google, the hiring manager has respect. Yeah, they would have done amazing stuff, but the lion's share of the attention at a brand level comes to them because of the company's brand. It's completely the inverse here. The lion's share of the attention to the company's brand comes because the people are amazing. At some point of scale, it will flip over. But for a very, very long time, it's the other way around. So you structure your entire branding around the people. And to begin with, that's you. My point here being that as your organization scales up, you can diversify your branding strategy to start building the brand around your key people who are amazing and market the opportunity to work with them as a key factor.
One thing which you did and which was, we talked a lot about it, you treated every organization problem as a product. Tell us about how did you treat, so I'm going to split into 2 big organization problems, and how did you treat them as a product? First is, how did you treat recruitment as a product? What did you do over there? And then how did you treat org scaling at a product? We'll come to that one later. But tell us, what is this product thought process which you apply to almost every organization problems?
So recruiting is a interesting one because I end up talking to folks a lot over that because a lot of my personal public branding is along those axes, right? Basically, I index my public brand along stuff like recruiting and engineering because it fits. And so a lot of inbound conversations around that. And when I talk to folks about recruiting, there's a lot of blunt instrument stuff going on there. It's like, yeah, I want to hire engineers. Okay? Tell me, what do the engineers you want to hire like? What do they like? What do you mean? Okay, you're building a product, right? Yeah, okay. What's your target segment? Okay, segment ABC. Age range this, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Tell me a little bit about that segment. What do these people like? They'll be like, yeah, they typically, drive these types of cars, work in these types of jobs, have these kinds of, I'm like, okay. You want to hire engineers, why don't you have the same level of detail on them? It's the same logic, right? It's an acquisition problem. So, the point I think that Ajay and I were discussing here is, there are very powerful mental models that we routinely use day in and day out for our product execution. without even thinking about it. I mean, 10 years ago, that stuff was rare. The lean startup stuff, segmentation, blah, blah. But today, this is very normal. Like all of us know it. You go to any meetup, talk to anyone, the language is normal. But somehow, it starts and stops with what we call which is why I asked the question earlier, what is the product? What is this thing called the product? And we generally tend to think that the product is the app or whatever equivalent, website, whatever, right? API, whatever it is that we're making and selling is the product. But that's not true, right? It's all interconnected. And if you use this lens, you can literally look at any problem that you need to solve and use this mental model and say, look, acquisition, engagement, retention, segmentation, behavior, value props, points at which engagement happens, all that stuff that we do on the app applies everywhere. So with recruiting, when you start thinking about it this way, what is the product model that you would apply to this? Product model is, I have customers in the market who have options. We call these customers candidates, and that messes with our judgment. Start calling them customers. We get this dramatic shift in our mental models by calling them customers, because when we say candidate, and I know that this is going to sound a little harsh, but it's the truth. At some level, we think because we are paying them that this is different. But the truth is, we're running for-profit companies, right? If you're running for-profit companies, they're actually giving us more. Otherwise, it wouldn't be profitable. It's in the nature of the transaction, right? So, yeah, we are paying them cash, equity, whatever, but the reality is they are giving us more value than we give them in terms of their capability, skill set, execution, what have you. So, they're our customers. Now, this has become doubly so in today's era than it was earlier because the demand-supply equation has shifted. Yeah, sure, the market's gone down and all that stuff. There's a lot more supply in the market. But the truth is that the top 1% that matter, which are the only real skill in the market, 99% of it is fluff, that 1% has remained the same forever. And we are all fighting for that 1%. This is how it is, right? Because the other 99% if we hire, it's a net negative, right? Because product execution is not fun, right? It's easy to mess it up. So now you're competing for a highly saturated market with a very short supply of customers who have lots of options. When you think about this as a product, you really have to say, I am offering an employment product to the market. This is what I'm doing.
Actually, it's true. Like Google offers baristas and chefs as a part of employment product.
Right? This is why it is so hard to compete with a Google. Because we say employee experience, but in our minds when we say employee experience, we are not thinking of it as product experience, right? In fact, for most people who say the word employee experience, there is no, when I say product experience, there are images that come up in your mind of things you care about, things that you would do to improve the product. That depth of reasoning is rarely there behind the label employee experience because we think employee experience is different from product experience. So my argument on this is, you're offering an employment product. What we call employee experience is product experience. You have acquisition channels, you have engagement, you have retention, you have churn. It's exactly the same. So now the question is, if you are running recruiting, acquisition, is operations fundamentally, right? You need to know your CAC channels down like that. Otherwise, you can't execute it, you can't scale it, right? You'll lose. Same thing applies for recruiting. You need to treat them like customers. They are demanding customers. Anybody you want to hire already has 5 offers, for sure. You're also going to be competing against the FANGs, right? And they're going to price you out of the market, for sure. They're going to give perks that you can't match, to your point. So now, this is true for us on product as well, right? None of us, it's very rare for us to be building a product that is absolutely a first in the market with no competition, with none of that stuff. This is exactly the challenge we take on with our products. I mean, just simply saying, think about your recruiting the same way with the same level of depth and attention to detail. What is your differentiation? Why is that customer going to pick you over someone else? Why will they stay with you? Right? And the moment you start structuring your recruiting, especially the acquisition part, with the same operational rigor as you run your product acquisition channels, you will start to see dramatic differences. Right? You will also start to do, like when you look at product referrals, right? We spend a lot of time looking at that. There's a super hardcore metric to run on recruiting, which I recommend for anyone the moment you cross, say, 15 people headcount size, which is how many referrals are you getting from candidates you have rejected? This is the test of the quality of your acquisition channels. That candidates you have rejected are sending you their friends because they had such a good experience.
Yeah. Yeah, we used to have a lot of those kind of things. Like we actually hired somebody after 3 years in Gojek. He kept applying every 6 months because we used to say we could not process your resume this time. We cannot go ahead with your candidate this time, but please come back after 6 months. That person actually referred us around 8 people, and he kept telling people that Gojek is such a great environment. And after 3 years, he came in when I was quitting, and he actually sent me a message saying, finally I am here and it feels good. So that, and it was nothing. It has nothing to do, we don't have perks. We don't have many things. What we had was the experience they had the first time. When somebody walks in, when somebody talks, that experience was like, so a lot of time, candidates feel that they are one row in the Excel sheet. You have hundreds of them and you treat them each one equally. One of the most important differentiation is that it is a hospitality industry. We brought that mindset that we are in hospitality and we are there to help them as much as we can. Whether offer is gone or not, whether they accept it or not, when they leave us, they are our ambassadors. Saying, okay, I did not like them, they did not offer me good salary, or they did not select me, but overall I had amazing fun while being at Gojek office or talking to people. Like being on time or sending them small gifts. Whether we reject them or accept them, we'll always give them something to take home. Because if they keep a Gojek cup in their office workspace, that's good branding for us, right? It doesn't cost us a lot. So those kind of things were very interesting. And Sidu actually designed a lot of stuff.
That reminds me, right? We went out of our way to make sure that we designed T-shirts because we realized that T-shirts are a very low-cost branding investment. But most people end up doing T-shirts which people wear to the gym or to bed. No one wants to wear it outside. So we discussed this and our head of design basically got in on the game. And he personally designed, like I still have like 3 of those T-shirts in the wrap. I've never taken them out. I'm preserving them but the strategy was this. We want somebody to see our brand in every competitor's office on hiring. If they're competing with us on hiring, I want people walking through my competitor's office to see Gojek T-shirts during the day. I want my brand recall to be there. Yep. And we did it. And it cost us nothing.
Yeah, we designed very beautiful T-shirts and they did not carry Gojek in a very, very on-your-face way.
This big at the back, that's it.
We had one T-shirt that says, there's no one else for engineers.
So basically what happened there is Abhinit, who was our head of design, used to keep track of all the memes running on Slack, right? And this was an example of that, where it's like, look, there's no one else. Whatever has to get done now, whatever's on fire now, there's no one else.
Yeah, like
so being there, pull those memes up and churn out T-shirts on those.
Yeah, been there, done that. Only been there, done that, got shit done.
In 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks or never. So we had in 2 weeks and behind we had never.
Because there was a joke around estimates, right? Like you say, how long will anything take? Everyone's like in 2 weeks. So we actually had like internal T-shirts for all of this stuff.
Yeah, and yes.
One question. You mentioned about the referral metric, right? What's a reasonable referral metric to look out for? Like if you're rejecting or interviewing 100 candidates, how many is a good number to have?
Look, I wouldn't worry about it that way. The way I would structure it is to say, what is my number today? And am I increasing it? There's no target that I can give you which makes sense for everyone. Like, I don't even know like how many people you have, because my answer to that would depend on how many candidates do you process in a month. For what segments? It'll be different for, say, engineering versus operations, right? So I would say, honestly, it doesn't matter. The question is, where is it today and is it going up? Right? And once you scale beyond a certain number, you want to attribute it to hiring managers. Because you're like, you will find that specific hiring managers handle candidates in such a way that their rejects bring in more candidates, right? So at a small scale, that isn't the case. You are the hiring manager, but as you scale up, track the metric, attribute it to the hiring manager.
So we did a customer segmentation on candidates. Single, married, kids, no kids, 20s, 30s, 40s, 2 years, 5 years, 6 years experience. We would intentionally ask people their history, which country, which city you are coming from, tier 2 city, tier 3 city. And those were very interesting things. Why did you do that?
Right from the get-go, right? We tend to think of the product as the app. But the reality is the product is everything that goes into delivering the value to our customers. Everything upstream. That is actually, if you'll forgive my slipping onto the technical side of it, right? The app is just the last artifact in a CI pipeline. That doesn't just pop into existence just like that. And something that I think is under-indexed on, except in like Googles who really get it, is that your people policy is a dramatic impactor of the product that gets delivered to the customer, right? And you cannot craft people policy unsegmented, right? Too many companies will treat people with kids and people with no kids the same way and then say, yeah, you know, I have some people who just like in the office all the time and working so hard, and there are other people who just like check out at 5. I'm like, yo, do you understand that the more experienced a person is, the stronger the likelihood that they have kids, right? So the moment they're like, no, you know, we were hiring, you know, and now we're scaling up, and like, yeah, so you started hiring 30-somethings who are married? Yeah, we started hiring more. Like, yeah, they have kids. You got to structure your people policy differently for each segment, right? Because they have different needs. How are you going to, we were talking about like acquisition, engagement, churn, right? How can you engage people if they're unsegmented? And these are just like very obvious things. You do it for your product, right? Age, marital status, dependence, right? Place of origin, and driving out from that. First language. Because we had like 3 very clear buckets, right? Native first language, native English speakers, non-native English speakers, like who are not comfortable in English. That segmented further. We had like primarily Hindi and Bahasa, right? Hindi in India and Bahasa in Indonesia. Now, if you're not aware of this, you're going to make mistakes in how you approach policy, which is going to mess with your engagement, which is going to cause churn.
So when we're scaling the org, apart from this, what else do you think in early days matters a lot?
I talked about this a little bit earlier, but as you start scaling up, it's very, what starts to slip through is that mental model. As I said, it becomes a black box. You want to keep thinking about your organization as a meta product. It's a product that builds your product, right? You don't make the car. You make the system that makes the car. So you as a founder in the early days are going to work on the car directly. This is natural. Problem is that as your organization scales up, you continue to work on the car. And then the system that is growing, that is actually making the car, because your ratio of input has changed, no? Earlier you were 1 in 3, now you're 1 in 5, 1 in 10, 1 in 20, plus you have 20 other things to do in the day. Your input into the product is just collapsing through the floor just because of time. But what you're ignoring continuously is you're going into try harder mode on the product without realizing that you have now actually got to focus on the meta product. You no longer work on the product. You work on the meta product. You cannot touch the product directly. It's meaningless. I mean, you can, but then you're doing it for fun. Meaning you're not doing it to materially contribute to the product. You're doing it because, okay, it gives you that motivation that, okay, I spent half an hour working on this thing or that thing. Not because you materially contribute to it. You have to devote the majority of your attention on designing and executing the meta product, right? Where the primary visible aspect of it is the people. And then there's this massive invisible aspect of it, which is sitting in as inventory in your emails, Jira, Asana, whiteboards, phone calls, whatever, all invisible, which is frankly something that you should be terrified about, right? Because And terrified because also it's not really tractable. You can't make it visible. It's not like a shop floor in a factory where if, component inventory is piling up, you walk across the floor, you're like, oh man, there's something wrong here. Right? You will have Jira stories piling up, and you will never know until you go look for it there. You can't stumble over it by accident. Right? So thinking about the system that builds your product as a product and the organization as the most visible part of it, but only the tip of the iceberg. Because otherwise what will happen, the other bias kicks in. You'll optimize what you can see. What can you see? The people. You can't see the work they do. You can't see the connections between them. And most of the heavy lifting happens in the connections between them and the work that they do. And which is why you keep coming back to this default mode where you're like, okay, things are not scaling. I'm stressed out. What lever do I pull? Add headcount. Very natural, but counterproductive.
One of the things which you also did was data engineering, right? And we actually ended up scaling a very large data engineering organization, which kind of was created literally outside of the main product engineering organization. What do you think in terms of building a very non-product facing organization? What kind of metrics we should do? Because eventually every one of them will either end up creating platform engineering, customer communication, some organizations which do not directly talk to product at all, or they do not even have a product interface. They do not even contribute to product. What do you think about like creating these kind of non-functional or non-directly contributing organizations, and how do you actually justify that? How do you make sure that there is somebody calls this developer experience or platform experience? What does really means to create this, and how do we measure the success of it?
We were running, we were at what, a mill transactions, and the existing architecture was really hitting limits, and it was all synchronous. And because there were multiple products, there were all of these synchronous integration points where to deliver something to the app. Say the example that I like to cite is transaction history. Right? We had at that time what, like 10 products?
10 products.
With 2 or 3 high transaction volume products. And when the customer opens the transaction history, there was an API which would call the billing, the transaction API for all those 10 products one by one. Summarize, like put everything together and send back, which is all fine up until you really start to scale, right? Like that stuff is going to break. And we knew that at the current trajectory of order volume growth, we were just like 6 months away from that and absolutely melting no matter what we do, right? Like this entire time we have a team on it that is just brute force scaling it, right? But the fundamental solution was architectural. So these guys decided that, okay, it's time to bite the bullet and go async. They're the tech, like I went sufficiently post-technical that while I would spectate and ask questions, like I didn't take the primary decisions, but they already had the hands full. He was like, obviously like running full out. Our other co-founder, Niranjan, who was the other CTO, full out. There was literally nobody else. We joked about that t-shirt, right? There's nobody else. So like we needed to be able to migrate to this async architecture. These guys picked the stack, Kafka, blah. Here's how the architecture of transport food, the other products will change to integrate with this. This is the new architecture. These are the pieces we're going to build. Awesome. And there was nobody else, so I picked it up. I mean, I'm still technical enough that I can code, but I can't take like these kinds of calls without help. So I said, fine. We built a small team. We started executing. 3 months later, we had something that was running in a small couple of use cases, standard events. Technical leadership was all aligned that, okay, these contracts make sense to us. Let's start migrations. And then we waited. 1 month passes. No one's integrating. Nobody. Ajay is losing his mind. His one-downs, who are like basically CTOs at unicorn scale of like 3, are losing their minds. They are giving top-down orders. Everyone, migrate to this stack now. Clock time's running out. This is going to go down. It got worse. We started having some intermittent downtimes around those subsystems, right? Like the transaction history was just one, but others started having intermittent downtimes. Nadeem started getting into it because the moment downtimes happen in subsystems, like Nadeem's like, Ajay's like, we're trying to do this, not. Nadeem goes out and puts out a missive. This is the #1 priority. We need to get this done. Still nothing's moving. This went on for 6 months. Things got really bad. And
We had a major downtime for almost like 12 hours. And we would have downtimes almost every other day around like for 2 hours. And that day we went down for 12 hours. Like morning 9 a.m. till evening 10:30 p.m. something like that.
right? So this is like what? We were like 120, 130 people
Yeah.
at that time in engineering, right? So I use engineering as a proxy number because you can do the fan out from there, right? Like for every one in every 2-3 engineers, there'll be so many others. So about 120 or 130 engineers. And nothing is moving. It's mission critical. There's a there's a group CTO mandate, group CEO mandate, division CTO mandate. There is a board of director level executive running the solution. All of us are pushing, nothing's moving. And what I'm about to tell you is the realization we had after organically trying to iterate and crack the problem. We looked back at what we did and we were like, at one point I'm like, look, we are failing to distribute. So I asked my colleague, my PM, I'm like, look, I want you to split your time. I want you to move 20% into sales. He's like, what do you mean sales? I'm like, dude, they are not picking it up. No, I want you to go to every product manager on every key product line because some of those things had multiple products, right? Like food was not one product, they're multiple. And I want you to sell. And we set up a proper sales Excel sheet, right? And in that we had like multiple stages, what we call humorously like the addiction phase, right? Like where you start bringing the product and you run it in trial mode and then you can't go back, right? You're locked in. All of that, like fairly standard sales stuff. Things started moving. They unblocked. The critical products moved over. Of course, there was a longer tail of non-critical systems which weren't hitting limits that didn't move, but it was moving. Then the larger thing started of, okay, now the real burning issues are addressed. Now we have to migrate because otherwise now we're running 2 architectures, right? This is problematic. Sooner or later, these will also break. So then the larger thing started. Again, it was very slow. So the next change we made was by this time, data engineering is like 10 people, 10 engineers. So we divided 20% into an implementation consulting team, right? 2 engineers on rotation, right? So every quarter or so, 2 people move into the consulting team, the other 2 move back into the platform team. These are names I'm giving you now. We didn't think about it this way when we were doing it. We were just like, look, our customers are telling us that they do not have the talent bandwidth on their teams to prioritize this migration. Can we solve it by putting our talent over there? This is how we were thinking about it. Then I was like, okay, I'm starting to realize that the stuff I'm doing over here is B2B SaaS. Like, look at what changes we have made. Now I have formal sales, which had now stuck. Like, we actually had a formal sales pipeline. And now I had 2 PMs. One of the PMs owned a formal sales pipeline perpetually. That did not die there. That became a standard. Second thing, I have an implementation consulting team. Then I'm like, okay, maybe this is the mental model. So I'm like, okay, guys, let's think about it like this. I'm a founder. I have a relationship with Nadeem and Ajay, right? But we are not in the company. We are outside. So I've gone and done a handshake deal with them. But now we've got to get seats. I've got to sell. This is how we need to think about it. So then we started setting up literally like what today in today's world would be called a DevTools SaaS. Website. Wiki. Like made the documentation pretty. We had tons of documentation. All readmes were there because obviously it's DevTool. Pulled it up on the website, made it searchable, made it pretty, product pages, product lines. Once we really went all the way into this model, that boss, this is a B2B SaaS company that's a captive, but it is nevertheless a B2B SaaS company. Things started moving. After that, every subsequent, what you would call a platform play in any other company, we simply modeled it as a captive B2B SaaS. Then we started realizing that as you really scale up, this also makes it easy for leadership to have levers to control. Because what you are literally doing is saying, look, I have a bunch of captive companies. I have captive service. You don't have functions anymore. You have a captive design firm. You have a captive PM firm. You have a captive engineering firm. Okay? Then you have all these other platforms which are captive product vendors to your consumer team. So your consumer products are now buying services internally. Right? You give them a budget, they go to the engineering services firm And they're like, look, I need this kind of talent at this. And the engineering firm's like, this is the price point. Burn budget. And eventually we realized, again, I'm saying all of this is us looking in hindsight and structuring what we organically stumbled in. Gojek India was a captive services firm. Right? So the moment we shifted to this, it just becomes economic control levels become clear. So to Ajay's question, the platform stuff, right? It's a captive B2B SaaS. Make sure it has a P&L. That was the last stage that we never managed to get to because IPO readiness, finance team. Otherwise, we were all ready to go to a level where it's like, boss, I will invoice you. Because I need to know how my product is performing, right? Yeah, I won't invoice you outside, but I will invoice you inside because that's our contract.
Yeah, and the reason we went up to that extent is because a lot of times you don't see the value of SRE teams. And this is what is going to happen to all of you in your SRE teams, because they will try to roll out new architecture, new VPCs, new container models, new database, and nobody's going to move.
Because they have their own OKRs, right?
Because everybody has their own OKRs. So we actually did that, and eventually that made our internal documentation so amazing that people actually, we start calling it, now people call it, what is called, people call it something called internal open source, they have a word for it. We actually had internal open source for a while, where people can actually access any repository, contribute it. Every service had SDK client. Anyway, those are more engineering details. We shouldn't get into that. Let's stick to the org and recruitment and dealing with the PMF. We have like 5-7 minutes. Any questions from you guys?
So you mentioned about links, like, and those being like going wrong. Like, how do we think about making sure that they go right?
Can you, which links between people?
Links between different teams and like.
Yeah. So I'm not sure that my approach would work for everyone because my origin story is I'm a dev, right? So I'm calling that out. But for me, I look at an organization as a distributed computing network. Straight up. In fact, I don't just look at the org, I look at the entire system as a distributed computing network where I have some nodes which are humans and some nodes which are machines. The whole point is highly repeatable processes which can be scaled are delegated to machine nodes. You know, non-repeatable, creative, values-driven decisions are delegated to human nodes. And you can instrument and observe the system the same way you would observe any network. What is the latency? What's the band? You know, like what's the throughput? Is there packet drop? Are there errors? It's just that with human nodes, you know that the packet drop is extremely high. Serialization, deserialization is extremely error prone. You know, it's extremely lossy. So you want to look at subnets within that, right? Which is what you would call a team, right? And you want to then look at the interfaces of that subsystem and say, how is that subsystem communicating with others? So you can look at it individually from one person to another in a team. So you consistently see miscommunication between two, right? Before I started thinking like this, I'd be like, why can't you people just figure it out? Why can't you just, I mean, none of it is actionable input as a manager, right? Instead, I would start digging into like, okay, why is there packet drop here? Are these people remote? Are they in different countries? What are the processes they use? Like one of the most powerful things we did was another colleague of ours introduced into the organization was silent meetings, which dramatically reduced packet drop and loss, right? So there's a lot of process that so your interventions have to be operational. This mental model will allow you to instrument and discover problems, but it's very important to not slip into your intervention being try harder. Intervention has to be operational. There is a process change that you bring in, and that has to fix the issue. Same thing from between teams, again, you just look at it like throughput, drops, errors in communication, then you diagnose it. But the point that I made, links is invisible, it is just to address the bias, right? Because we will see the individuals. But what is actually at play there is our organization. The organization is invisible. Only the individuals are visible.
Thanks a lot, Sidu, for actually coming and
Thanks so much
helping
for
us.
having me, Ajay. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.